All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Mr. Lewis here with your Tuesday Snow Day e-learning opportunity. And if you're watching this video, you've already done step 1 of 2 today, so congrats on that one. The first thing I wanted you to do was simply to watch this video lecture. The second thing is to complete the checkpoint that goes with this video lecture. So today, we're covering section 6.3 in the notes. There's a 10-question checkpoint to go with that. But I wanted to start in the Buzz agenda today to point out a couple things over the next 2 weeks. This week, we're going to be finishing up with Unit 6 content. Today, 6.3. Tomorrow, you're going to watch a great video with some questions to go along with it about China's political activities in Africa and other parts of the world. And then Thursday, we're going to go through section 6.4. Friday, section 6.5. And then moving into next week, we will begin reviewing for the Unit 6 test. So here's where it gets interesting. On Monday and Tuesday, those of you who are in-person learners will be going down to the Learning Commons to do scheduling with your guidance counselor. So you'll only be down there either Monday or Tuesday, and I'll let you know this week in person which day we'll be doing that for each class. But the point is, you definitely want to have a good idea of what you want your schedule to look like for next school year when we go into those meetings. So I've been encouraging you to think about that while you're home today, perhaps. Maybe talk to mom or dad or grandma and grandpa or whoever it might be that helps you with some of your scheduling stuff at home, and then you'll have a pretty good idea of what you'd like to take going into next year when you meet with your guidance counselor next week. Again, that'll be either on Monday or Tuesday. Wednesday of next week, I will host an office hours Kahoot review. And again, that'll be after reviewing either Monday or Tuesday in class for the test as well. Thursday, we'll continue with test review in class. We'll work through the study guide, practice test questions, things like that. And then on Friday, you will have your Unit 6 test over political geography. If there are any changes to this schedule, you will be notified immediately. But with that said, just to make the best use of our time, I don't want to be too long-winded here on your Snow Day e-learning day. So let's go ahead and jump into the slides. And I'll work through the section 6.3 notes and then leave you to do your checkpoint. So, we've been discussing political geography, and we've been talking a lot about borders and different types of states and different shapes and forms that these countries take around the world. Now, in section 6.1, we looked at the different types of states and nations and gave some examples: landlocked states, compact states, microstates, perforated states, things like that. Section 6.2, we started talking about how conflict can rearrange these borders. They can change borders, they can change leaders, they can change political systems. Conflict can really have a huge impact on the political landscape of the world. In section 6.3 now, we're looking specifically at the different types of boundaries that we find around the world. And we already started dabbling just a little bit in the political boundaries section by talking about how some boundaries are straighter because they're set by lines of longitude and latitude, right? They are these perfectly linear borders that run around some countries, or I should say run between two countries. In some cases, though, those boundaries are curvy and go this way and that, and usually that's because they're based on some type of natural physical feature in the land. So there are different types of boundaries, and the point is, when all the dust settles, when all these conflicts come to an end, these boundaries need to be drawn or redrawn in some cases, because we need to know what laws are governing that section of land. So these boundaries are incredibly important, and we see that throughout history they have established sovereignty in some areas. When a country or a nation of people declares independence and attempts to regain their sovereignty or control over their own affairs, right? They want to determine their present and their future. That's sovereignty, having control over your way of life, your laws, all of those things. In order to establish that sovereignty, oftentimes that's done through boundaries. So you set a boundary and you say, hey, we control this territory. These are the laws that govern this land. And that's it, right? That's sovereignty. That's a very clear way of establishing sovereignty. Now, unfortunately, oftentimes that sovereignty must be defended in battle, in war. But the point is, these boundaries establish these lines of sovereignty, right? They're telling us who controls which territory of the earth. So they don't just mark legal separations in terms of states and counties and things like that. They also can represent these cultural divisions, national divisions. And again, those are often contested throughout history, and we've seen these boundaries change time and time again as the sovereignty of the land itself changes. So here's a little video showing you some of the settlement of the United States, and you can see the timeline on the bottom here. We've got 1800. This is the year 1800. So just taking a look at what's going on in the year 1800. Here's Indiana, right at the bottom of Lake Michigan. We're not really formed yet. We're in the Northwest Territory, and if you're wondering, like, why is this Northwest? Don't we call the Pacific Northwest states like Washington, Oregon, places like that? We do today, but back then, Northwest is in relation to all of these states that you see in blue here. Think about the original 13 colonies along the East Coast. Well, to them, Northwest would have pointed to where we are today, or what we call the Midwest today. So it's all relative, but this is in 1800. Indiana doesn't exist as a state yet. You can see some of these states have just begun to form in the middle region of the country here, Kentucky, Tennessee. So as we continue to move westward, you can see Indiana, this giant swath of territory, just after 1800. So this isn't the official state of Indiana yet. But then we get the Louisiana district, this giant portion of land that covers much of the central region of the United States. So moving along, let me close that. Missouri Territory, here we get Illinois and Indiana. So Indiana's formed as a state around 1850. Illinois, same thing. You can see Michigan also starting to form up here. And then we get these different territories turning into states as they develop out west. So take a look at some of these boundaries, not just the states that are forming, but the borders themselves. In some cases, they are quite linear or straight, right? A straight line. In some cases, they are quite curvy. You see at the bottom of Texas here, this is the Rio Grande, the river that separates Texas from Mexico. So, of course, that's not going to just be a straight line sort of border, right? That is going to follow the natural path of the river. And then we move into the late 1800s. We're getting some of these states out here today. Idaho, Montana, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming. Now, keep in mind, when they're orange, they're only territories. It's not until they turn blue on this map that they're official states. So finally, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Arizona are the only holdouts, and there we go. Okay, and then eventually we're going to get Hawaii and Alaska. So it's kind of interesting to see how these borders have changed and how the political landscape of the United States has been altered over time. And some of that, again, through conflict, some of it through acquisition. So the Louisiana Purchase, for example, we actually purchased as a country this territory that became all these different states we have in the United States today. So there are many different reasons, sometimes through conflict, sometimes not, that the United States has expanded throughout history. And keep in mind, when we talk about political geography, it's not just states, right? We also have U.S. territories such as Puerto Rico or American Samoa that are stretched all across the world, not just in the contiguous United States, but out in the middle of the ocean or in the Gulf of Mexico or like Alaska up in the Arctic Circle. So The United States is what we call a fragmented state. It's a country that's divided into all these different territories that are detached throughout the world. Now, there are different tools for drawing these political boundaries. So these are sort of the systems that are followed. We have three major categories of demarcation or drawing boundaries. Physical boundaries follow things like water and land features such as mountains. Geometric boundaries use parallels and meridians, so lines of latitude and longitude. Cultural boundaries are usually representing ethnic or cultural divisions. Now, within those categories, there are different types of political boundaries. A superimposed boundary is a geometric boundary, typically, that's using parallels and meridians to set a border. But what's specifically important about a superimposed boundary is that it's drawn by an outside force. So if a colonial power, as we've seen throughout history, came into an area and set a border, regardless of whether it was a geometric boundary or not, that is a superimposed boundary. It's being imposed on an area by some other power, by an outside force. An antecedent boundary existed before modern settlement. So usually these are land features because they were already there. They weren't established by using a parallel or a meridian. They existed before human settlement really took place. It was sort of a natural boundary in a way. We call this antecedent because it was already there. A subsequent boundary, on the other hand, accommodates development. So antecedent boundaries already existed, whereas a subsequent boundary accommodates some type of political development. So if there's some type of boundary that occurs as a result of political differences, political division, balkanization, that kind of thing, that would be a subsequent boundary. A consequent boundary is one that is based on culture. So I like to remember consequent begins with a C, culture begins with a C. A consequent boundary is one that is determined by culture, religious differences, linguistic differences, ethnic differences, that sort of thing. And then finally, a relic boundary no longer actually gets used. It actually no longer matters. It doesn't have any more significance, but we can still see it in the cultural landscape. It is a relic boundary, meaning it used to mean something, it doesn't anymore, but we can still see it. It's an antique, it's a relic, right? It's not being used anymore, but it's still in the landscape. So the picture you see here is the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall is a relic boundary because you can still see portions of the Berlin Wall separating East and what used to separate East and West Germany and East and West Berlin. You can still see sections of it in Berlin today, but it doesn't have any actual meaning as a boundary. It's just still there. It's a relic. So that's it for the types of boundaries that we see around the world. What I'd like you to do today is to take that information and apply it to that 6.3 checkpoint. So go back into the Buzz agenda, find that link where it says checkpoint. After working through the 6.3 notes, click here to complete the 6.3 checkpoint, and we'll go ahead and start that. And what you'll see is there's a couple true false. There's one that has multiple answers here, check all that apply. And then there are a few questions from the slides themselves. So if you have to go back and watch that video to answer a couple of these questions or go back and check those notes, feel free to do that. That's why they're there. But that's all I have for you today. So thank you very much for tuning in. Go ahead and make sure you knock out this checkpoint, get a 10 out of 10, get that 100%, and we will move on with more political geography content tomorrow. All right, thanks everyone. Enjoy your snow day. Go make a snowman. Stay warm, stay dry, stay safe, and we'll talk soon. Bye.